Hi, I'm Elia Einhorn, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Music Podcast. Today's episode features two generations of experimental music's most important figures, Ian Williams of Battles and Lee Ranaldo of Sonic Youth. The two spoke as part of the Talkhouse's ongoing series of live podcast recordings at Samsung 837 in Manhattan. Ian Williams first made his name in Don Caballero and then Storm and Stress, but it's as a guitarist and keyboardist in the band Battles that he's really found success. He's also a new music composer, and his orchestral work has been performed at Carnegie Hall. Battles are in the midst of a world tour supporting their fantastic third album, La Di Da Di, out now on Warp Records. Lee Ranaldo is a co-founder of seminal noise pioneers Sonic Youth. By incorporating avant-garde sounds and new guitar tunings, the band even rebuilt guitars in pursuit of their vision. Ranaldo's style has helped shape the sound of experimental rock for 3 decades now. Ranaldo is also, amongst other things, a poet and producer, and has recently worked on HBO's Vinyl. A quick note. At one point, Lee accidentally turned his microphone off for a minute or so of the conversation. You'll hear the audio change for just a moment, then everything goes right back to normal. As they have been for generations of musicians, Sonic Youth were a huge influence on teenaged Ian, who was really excited to speak with one of his heroes. The guys talked about the role and process of lyrics in their work, writing for bands versus scoring orchestral music, and how Ian was profoundly musically inspired by the cheerleading movie Bring It On. Check it out.
So you're in the middle of a world tour?
Yeah, we like 3 or 4 days ago got back from Europe this past weekend. Yeah,
you guys tour a lot, right? Like long stretches away.
It seems that way. Yeah, I mean, I try not to make it too punishing. You know, but it's like that. The economies of scale. Like if you're gonna jump over to Europe. Like,
why do one show and you can do a week?
Yeah. And then,
or why do 2 months when you can do 4?
Yeah. we're like we rent our gear when we go to other territories.
Yeah.
So like a lot of times that ends up being, you get used to the new amps, and so the more like. The first show is always sort of a small disaster. Like, wait, this amp does something different. And, things like that. Although we make an effort to, like, I use Ampeg SVTs because they're like the cleanest, most sort of, they don't break up. They're sort of anti-guitar amps, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like just duplication of what you send it, and you can still do it at a really loud volume. And that it's a generic thing that you can get in you can go to Asia, you go to Latin America, you go to Europe, America. They have the same thing.
That's a bass amp, though, isn't it?
It is,
technically.
Yeah.
So what are you putting through it? Keyboards and guitar?
Yeah. And it's sort of in bad taste, but I've migrated to a laptop. Meaning...
It's not in bad taste.
Well, yeah, but I'm playing my guitar through a laptop now, which
so the guitar is plugged into the laptop?
Yeah, but I'm attracted to that because it's sort of a bad idea. And it's that kind of good.
So the laptop is like a very expensive effects pedal.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, exactly. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. What are you doing these days? Are you...
I just finished a new record that's taken me the last... I started it almost exactly a year ago this week, and I just finished it. And it's been a really interesting process. I'm working for the first time in a long time with an outside producer, a friend of mine from Barcelona, Spain, a guy named Raul Fernandez. And
does he produce other stuff?
Yeah, he produces a lot of stuff. He's pretty well known in Spain. I don't think really anybody here knows who he is, but he's done everything from modern day flamenco stuff to rock music to orchestral stuff. He does a lot of different stuff over there. Yeah. And he recorded a record with my band in Barcelona about 3 years ago. We went into the studio for a week. We had a week off in Europe, and we went into the studio and made an all acoustic record.
Yeah.
Stand up bass and the whole thing, no
Yeah.
electric instruments. And we kind of hit it off and just became fast friends. And he kept saying, like, I'd love to work with you on new stuff, because the acoustic record was mostly stuff from my past records and covers. And he was in New York like early April last year for a few weeks doing something. And he was like, let's kick some stuff around at the studio and see what happens. And what happened was really cool. And so we've spent the last year, like, he'll fly over for 2 or 3 weeks. We'll work in our studio. I was just in Barcelona for a few weeks finishing the mix. And it's been pretty interesting. It's been a very different way of working for me.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, producer, as opposed to engineer, right?
Yeah,
Is
well,
that
both.
The
He's both.
dichotomy that you're sort of thinking
Yeah.
about in terms of the way it's presented. And, engineer duplicates what you, the artist, say, this is my expression, and the engineer just captures it on tape or a hard drive, right?
Yeah.
Producer
Brings their own ideas to the table.
yes says.
Yeah.
I mean, an extreme example of a producer is like bubblegum pop, where like some producer guy makes all the music.
Yep.
And
Dr.
you
Luke.
get some teeny boppers to
Yep.
be plugged in and be a cute face, right?
Yeah.
But now,
Yeah.
of course, in between, there's a whole lot of tasteful range. You like the
Yeah.
Brian Enos or the
Yep.
people who will be the co-artist in
Yeah.
the process. Right?
Yeah. This is a bit more like that. It's definitely been a kind of a co-production in a way. But my last record I made with my band, and just like we sat in our rehearsal space for 3 or 4 months, just like working on these songs and refining them, and we were kind of recording the whole time we were there. Because at the studio, which is Sonic Youth Studio over in Hoboken, we've got multi-track setup. So from the very first rehearsal, we were recording in multi-track, and at a certain point, we were like, yeah, that sounded great. That's the take, and it was kind of like done like that, and very organically. And this record was totally different. Like, I had a bunch of demos started, but I hadn't shown anything to my band or anything like that. And he came over and was just like, kind of like, well, what do you got? And every song kind of started with me with an acoustic guitar in front of the microphone, just like doing some skeletal thing. And then he was like, all right, let's put a vocal on. I was like, well, I don't have any words yet. He was like, just do something, so I know where the vocals are going to be. Mm-hmm. And so I'd go out there and be, yabba dabba doing or whatever, and, getting some melody. I had the melody lines, I just didn't have the lyrics. And, we'd build a song like that in like, a couple hours. And then he'd say like, all right, give me 3 or 4 hours, and he'd put in samples and electronic beats and cut stuff up, and maybe in certain cases change the structure a little bit, or say like, how about if we try this part in the front, or whatever like that. And then after a day or so of work, we'd have a structure for this song, and then we slowly started bringing people in to play on it, and we played more on it and bring people in. Different drummers, different musicians of all sorts. So it was a really interesting process. It was really a production like that, rather than just like the band is in the room with the mics on, and at a certain point you're getting the thing to happen. You know?
See, the producer thing to me has always been, in theory, I understand why it could be really cool. Some of the problems I have with the idea of sitting down with a producer would be that I'm the type of person who would sit and do 30 takes. And each time it'll be like slightly crazy and different. And like sometimes disastrous. Like, I'm going to try this, and it'll be like the worst thing ever. And like I'm always afraid that if it's really the guy, if it's a co-collaborator who's going to be like, he would just not understand and be like, either cut me off and say we're wasting time, or not have the patience to sort of listen through like 45 takes and recognize that the 43rd is really good. Like, because I'm not, and also I like the way I improvise. I find that it's a lot of times I'm actually sort of writing in real time, kind of like, and then maybe this note can come after this note, and what if this thing happened right here, and sometimes when I hit upon like a great sequence of events, like, yes, that's it. It's the execution's really sloppy and crappy. But then I'm like, okay, I'm going to save that sequence, and then I can go back and maybe try to be a good musician on it or something. But just that in itself is so many layers of things to explain to the engineer. Like I think a lot of people will like listen to the third take out of 40 and be like, "That's it, we got it." And then I'll be like, no, that's just the beginning of what I'm trying to do. It's not it. So anyway, but that's like one fear I have of ever.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a fear, and what it takes is the right chemistry. And we had that, and I was able to sort of feel like I could put my trust in him. And the thing that was cool was like, I'm like that too. I'll be like, let me try another take with a slightly different, edge to it or whatever it is, and he was very good at saying, like, you know what, this take is really good. We've got something really good here. Let's follow this path or whatever. So he was good at being very objective at points where, maybe I was like, well, that sounds cool, but that sounds cool too, and he'd be like, no, I think we should go this way, and in general, I found that he was right. So, it worked out really. It was really interesting, and we were building these songs up over, literally we spent a year working on the record. And partly the reason it took so long is because I wasn't done with lyrics. And so, like, he'd fly over for 3 weeks, and we'd be like, "Are we going to do the real vocals?" And I'd be like, "Well, I don't really have the real vocals yet, so, like, let's work on some more music,
Yeah, lyrics to you, because I've always been a fan of your spoken word kind of on top of the noise escape stuff, and then so obviously poetry is important to you, and then lyrics in a song form. I've always had an awkward relationship with lyrics in the sense because a lot of the music I've always been involved in has been instrumental.
Yeah, from Don Caballero forward.
Yeah, so
did we ever play together? I feel like we did, but I don't know for sure.
I mean, we were obviously fans of yours. I don't think we were ever fortunate enough to do that.
I don't know why I thought we did somewhere, and I was trying to remember where it was. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay, but go back to
lyrics. I think I would have remembered that.
Yeah.
So like lyrics in a song and stories, and like that's an interesting thing because obviously you do a lot with sound and sort of innovative restructurings of music, and then at the same time, but then there's that traditional side of like I got to tell the right story here. That's kind of cool because I've kind of, I think I'm such an outsider to lyrics and like the story of a song. Like I've got to properly convey the story of how I love my girlfriend, or so you're like there's so I'd roll my eyes at the corniness of that. You're like, what's that really? Because if I think of
where's that in 2016?
Like if I think of my favorite music, a lot of which has lyrics, I don't even know what the lyrics are usually. It's like there's like that.
Well, you know what? That's so funny because, I'm really a lyrics guy, so the lyrics in songs mean so much to me. But I have so many good friends. Like, I'd be hanging out with Thurston, and he'd start singing a song, and I would be like, "Those aren't the right lyrics at all." And he was like, "Oh, I don't."
To one of the songs he sang?
No, to like somebody else's song, like a Paul McCartney song or something like that.
Yeah.
And he'd be like, "Man, that's funny. That's how I always heard him, and that's what I always thought he was saying." And it's kind of comforting to me to know that not everybody out there is analyzing every word of the lyrics, because it's such a stressful thing to me to feel like I really want the lyrics to be, something particular and right in a certain way. Now, like you guys, I was listening to some of your early stuff, and there's vocals, but I wouldn't exactly say there's lyrics.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of instrumental stuff, and then there's like the recent stuff where you had I from Boredoms on one song doing vocals, and Gary Newman and stuff like that. And so I was kind of curious as to what your guys' take on working with vocalists was.
Yeah, it's always been, to me, I've always felt very awkward around the issue, but still wanting to have that definitely have a singer sometimes. And as silly as it sounds, when we started as a group, Battles, this sounds like I'm making up a lie, but it's true. I had seen the movie, I think it was Bring It On. Was that like the cheerleader movie from like circa 2000?
Bring It On?
I think that's what it was called. It was like just like a Hollywood like cheerleader film. Like
okay.
2 cheerleader teams compete in a contest. But so it was this like girls doing gang chant, kind of like yeah, 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 but in a rhythmic structure. And I was like, that's what I want to do, like something with like, so like. So when I moved to New York in 2000, and I started telling people, I was like, I like need to like start working with like bunches of like female singers, and then like, and the ambition of what I was trying to do, I think, didn't occur to me until I actually got like 12 people in a room together, like trying to like, you know, a crappy little Brooklyn practice space.
Yeah.
You know, you only have for 3 hours, and you're like, how do I get these people to do anything worthwhile right now?
Yeah.
And it was really hard. And that was sort of when Battles was beginning. And we actually did a few shows with like groups of women singing.
Wow.
And I felt like it was not at its full potential. And it was almost like practical, like scheduling, like, you know, this is like 2002-3 when we were starting as a band. Like we were making no money, and New York City, everybody's busy. It's like, okay, Tuesday night practice at 7 p.m. Be there. Like it's really impossible to get like 15 people to show up.
Yeah.
So like, it was just like, oh man, I kind of like retreated back to like mostly instrumental music. I was like, oh, let's just like focus on like, you know, drums, bass, guitar, electronic things, and then. But although if you listen to the very first EPs, like the first batch of music we released, there is buried in the mix, you can hear like there's like like a group of people doing that kind of stuff, and that was just groups of friends.
I mean, I know what you're talking about. I've got this desire or ambition to do some pieces with large groups of singers, and it's really just a formidable task to try and figure out how to deal with it, and how to write the stuff and like bring that many people together and like try stuff that may not work and say like, all right, come back next week and I'll be in better shape, or you know, whatever it is. When I was young, like when I was in from elementary school through high school, I was a choral singer. And I sang with like the school chorus and stuff like that. And there's something really thrilling about singing with a large group of people. And, you know, we did some really weird avant pieces and stuff that were very, very modern. And, you know, it was really interesting, but it's kind of daunting to figure out.
You went to high school around New York?
In Oyster Bay, Long Island, yeah, about an hour from here. And I had a pretty impressive choral teacher, and he had a couple really weird avant-garde pieces that we did. One was about it was sort of a memoriam to soldiers who died in Vietnam, and it was just all these names, and like different groups of people were shouting out lists of names at different points in time, and there was some pitch information and stuff like that. But I don't remember whose piece it was. I've always been kind of curious to know. But we did some pretty out there stuff, as well as doing, you know, like show tunes and whatever, you know, Handel's Messiah or whatever. But it was pretty thrilling. So I'd really love to get back to that point at some point. We did some masked vocals on my new record. We had
what do you mean by mask?
Well, just like lots of stacked harmonies, and then like sort of stuff that sounds more like a round, where like voices come in halfway through and do another melodic line and stuff like that. That were mostly built from my voice and Raul, the producer's voice, and Sharon Van Etten sang on 5 or 6 songs on the record, and we had her do a whole bunch of layered stuff as well, which turned out really, really well. But you know, I've always wanted to write a piece for you know, I've done some stuff for Bang on a Can. Have you written something for them, or have you worked with those guys? You know who they are.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, they're great. But
I wanted to write
people
a vocal
who are
piece
very
for
tangentially in that circle. I worked with.
I wanted to write a vocal piece sort of like that. We've got one piece that has lots of different vocals. It's kind of it's my version of a Meredith Monk style piece. You know, lots of like sort of like almost or Philip Glass, kind of like wordless vocal thing with marimbas and stuff going underneath it and things like that. But you know, if we're talking about lyrics, the interesting thing for me on this record was I was really trying to get some different perspectives, like, you know, like what you're saying about, like, you know, how many times can I write about how much I love my girlfriend, or, you know, whatever it is. And I wanted to try and get outside of the sort of the personal aspect of it. So I asked a friend of mine, the author Jonathan Lethem, Brooklyn author.
Sure.
He's been a longtime friend of mine.
Well-known guy.
And, he's pretty well known. And I wanted to hit him up on my last record to do some lyrical collaborations, and I didn't do it. And on this record, I was really thinking, like, I'd love to find somebody else to collaborate with on lyrics. I've never really done that before. And, you know, in the early days of Sonic Youth, we traded lines a little bit, or we helped each other out on lyrics. And there came a point pretty early on where it was always like each of us was writing our own lyrics, you know, pretty specifically. And I wanted to try something different, just to take it out of my own personal point of view. And so he collaborated with me on the lyrics to, like, I don't know, 6 of the 9 new songs. And that was a really interesting process of, like, sending paperwork back and forth or sending, you know, I'd send him one of these acoustic demos with a little bit of flesh on its bones and just me going like, you know, yabba dabba do. And every once in a while there'd be a hooky line or something. And I, you know, I'd send him a lyric sheet that was mainly like, you know, 2 or 3 lines of English, and the rest was all just like gabba gooba gooba, and he'd send me back a full lyric based on the couple lines that were actually there, and then we'd try to sort of send him back and forth. So it was pretty interesting. It was really, really fruitful, I think.
Because it also has to feel comfortable in your mouth.
Yeah,
out, right?
yeah. Well, that's the thing. The first
like
couple things he sent
Venetian
me were like
vase,
yeah,
and it feels kind of clunky.
Yeah. Well, there were a couple things like that, and there were a couple places where he sent back things that I felt were like challenging for me to sing. Like there was a line about prayer, and there was a line about a gun, and I was like, wow, these are kind of loaded things that I wouldn't normally gravitate towards singing. And so you know, I was like, do you mind if I modify these lines? And so I modified them to suit myself. But then in the end, like, again, like my producer was like, you know, I like pray better than stray or whatever I changed it to. And so we went back to his lines, and I was like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to sing these lines and, you know, challenge myself to make them my own in a way, which was pretty interesting process overall. Right. So this record was a lot more collaborative in that way, like a lyrical collaborator, a musical collaborator in a different way than my band is a musical collaborator. We're musical collaborators. So it was a pretty interesting process. I mean, it took a long time. It was one of, you know, I have to say, and I'm curious, you know, listening to your stuff, and I was kind of doing a refresher the last few days. I'm really curious how you put that stuff down on tape and how you record in terms of like, do you pay, you know, day rates on studios, or do you have your own? I mean, it seems like the kind of music that would take a long time to assemble. Yeah. And I'm curious as to how you assemble it, and how you record it, and how you play it live as well.
Yeah, right.
Because it seems like very, very. I mean. Elias called it proggy, but I mean, I think of it. It's very highly structured. Yeah. In ways that, like, you know, the instruments are not
sounds.
Like, you know, like, and the sounds kind of in places shift almost every bar, and it seems, you know, I don't know if a lot of that is being done improvisationally, or if it's really like the kind of thing that's repeatable night after night, or if it's programmed, or you know.
Yeah, on my side of the stage, with the magic of computers, you can. Yeah, recall those settings. Yeah, you know? I mean, that's the way that you have versus pedal. Dave, the other non-drummer in the band, you know, he's got the analog pedals, and so he's the guy who's like, I gotta get that like knob like just at 11:30 to do that thing. Whereas I've the wonderful part of like hitting a button to like have all your plug-in settings go boing is that, you know, it can remember, you know, the value of like 4.657. Yeah. And go right back to that. And so I think like the beginning of this band, 2002, like when I moved to New York in 2000, I'd worked as a video editor for a couple of years, so I got sort of proficient at being computer editor guy. Yeah. And so when Battle started, it, you know, we recorded on Pro Tools in our practice space, and but those first EPs that we made were pretty primitive.
Did you make them in your practice space?
Yes, although we snuck into Dubway Studios, which is up in Midtown Manhattan, sort of for some overnight free sessions for some drum tracks, and our friend Emery Dobbins, who's a good producer, he engineered those songs for us. So in the end, we mixed finally out in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, and I'm forgetting the name of the place we mixed, But the assemblage and the sort of composition was sort of done like, in computer, and sort of like listening back and saying this should happen here and that can happen there. And then we kind of got better. I mean, better. Whether it was better artistically, I don't know. But we got technically more sophisticated, and by the first real album, Marriage, and then the second album, Glass Drop, and the third album, Lottie Dottie. It's been a progression. For one thing, a lot of times the backbone of the song, you might have noticed, is still a loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually we learned that instead of going into an expensive recording studio to record the loop, is you can record the loop, you can cheat and record DI in your practice space or something, right? Yeah. So you can get the je ne sais quoi, and spend 3 days worrying about small details. So we started doing that, and so we've developed a good relationship with a studio up in Rhode Island called Machines with Magnets.
Okay, I've heard of that place.
It's actually in Pawtucket. Oh, they like to advertise it as Providence, so they're fancy, trying to be fancier. But
are one of you guys from up that way?
Dave has Massachusetts roots. Yeah,
okay.
Worcester, and he went to
Where are you
art
from?
school in Boston, Western Pennsylvania boy.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I got my start in musically speaking in Pittsburgh. I went to University of Pittsburgh, and by the time I got out of school, Don Cab was going. And
did you study music?
No, my parents were the type of parents who, while supportive, also were kind of like this practical, like you're going to get a job kind of thing. And so I did history, poli-sci, thinking I don't know, I'll go to law school or something someday. But then, I don't know, it was probably the economy in Pittsburgh was always really crappy, and there was it was what am I going to do? And then also you have this cool thing, this band, and we got a deal with Touch and Go at the time, which some young kids from Pittsburgh who looked up to, all our heroes were people like Steve Albini and everything. We're like, oh my God, we're on Touch and Go record.
Yeah.
Also, that was way better than trying to get a job. So I've always, I've sort of done music my whole life without it really being a plan. And I guess sort of being an outsider. I've always felt like an outsider to the process, to playing guitar and piano, but I think that sort of aids me in some ways. I mean, in the sense of, finding my own awkward way to make it work.
Yeah.
It makes you find your own voice,
sure.
I guess. And I think that you guys, I mean, what I love about Sonic Youth is that you guys developed your own language.
Yeah, well, we were also not, trained musicians. I mean, Thurston and I grew up playing rock and roll for sure, but, we didn't have, backgrounds that were super instructional on that level. And we were, and as soon as we started with the weird tunings, that was a way to set ourselves aside and set ourselves into unknown territory where we were just we didn't know what the heck we were doing or getting into. And then you refine it. Like you say, I know what you mean. By 3 records in, you're at least, you're on a path that you're familiar with, and you know kind of where you're heading, and you're building up a language of your own in a way at that point.
Yeah, and you're referencing yourself. Almost.
Yeah.
Okay.
But for instance, you recently did this orchestral piece that I heard.
Right.
You would call it orchestral, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how big an orchestra it is.
Yeah.
And I just recently wrote some pieces for a large ensemble, a string ensemble out of Berlin, and then I did it with a couple different ensembles with different. It started as a string ensemble piece, and then it built up to have other percussion and things. But I was curious as to how you wrote that, because I mean, I have a musical background to some degree. My mom was a pianist, but I don't. I read music only at great pain, so trying to write a piece for a big ensemble was a challenge for me on a lot of different ways. And I worked with some orchestrators and things like that, like young conservatory guys who were helping me translate, in some cases done well, and in some cases kind of frustrating, translate the sounds that I wanted to, to put on a big group. So I was listening to your piece, and I was wondering, how did you go about writing this? Are you writing it with samples on a sampling keyboard, or are you actually writing it on paper? Or and how much of that kind of stuff have you done besides
the
that
reference to me being a video editor once and sort of becoming comfortable working in the computer screen. So I laid it out in Logic, just using samples of orchestra instruments, and I even figured out how to write. I mean, the chords in that piece, they're pretty complex. I mean, in the sense of moving around, and it was really just note for note, me laying it out and figuring out and I sort of I have an ear for complementary sounds like in counterpoint, and so I was like, okay, this could be sort of like a cello, I guess, and this could be like some flutes that are like, blah, blah, blah. And so like I already sort of had an orchestrated idea of how to go about it, and I laid this stuff out, and then I worked with an orchestrator too.
You did.
His name was Andrew Lee, and he helped ground it a bit because you might have run into it. There are these issues like with acoustic music, you need 6 violins to equal the volume of one clarinet or something like that, and you can't just turn it up.
Yeah, there's balance issues. Yeah.
And like you should move that like an octave higher, and that'll really kind of soar. Like these. So we worked things out like that. And just him sort of grounding me in a bit in reality, like there's no way like they're gonna be able to play like a line that fast or that busy, if you want it to sound like that, it's not gonna. It'll sound terrible, and people will just be stumbling on the notes and trying to sort of ground it. So, and it was, and my sight reading is not very good either. So, although I found the one thing that it ended up doing to me that sort of actually trickled down into my playing music recently with battles has been that it really made me sensitive to the idea of measures and swung time and so like dotted notes for rhythm. Instead of like, especially with the music like battles, it's like the loop and the rhythm can really hit you over the head. So like you can really just be on the beat all the time, on the beat. And this idea of like, and I used to maybe sometimes worry like if I was like rushing the rhythm or if I was dragging the rhythm too much. And like it sort of freed me up in this way of realizing that like this is probably something they teach you like first year in music school, and it's like the most obvious thing. But like that a measure is, it's just sort of like a little cage for a moment, a speck of time, and that within that, like your individual expression as the musician is all about sort of getting off of the beat. Yeah. And that's kind of, if you're on the beat all the time, it's really like you don't have a voice. But as soon as you get in between the beats, that's where like the funk and the soul,
swing and all that. Yeah.
Which is sort of like like after dealing with sheet music for a while, that's like that was like the thing that came to me.
Yeah. Steve Shelley would always say to me, like, you're behind the beat. And like after him saying it for years, I realized that's how I feel in the beat.
Yeah.
I like being behind the beat. Yeah. Just a little bit.
Good. So how was it for you? So did you guys perform your string pieces?
Yeah. We did it in Amsterdam at this festival called the Holland Festival. I forget what it was. It was like 4 violins, 4 cellos, 4 violas, 2 upright bass. So it was something like that. It was like 16 or 18 players, and we performed it there. And then later I performed it with a different ensemble in Australia where we added percussion elements and some other things, and it was pretty interesting. And this wind ensemble, I was friendly with this guy that was working with them as a conductor and programmer, and they like to commission different people. So he wanted to commission me to do this work. His name was Andre van Ritter, a Dutch guy, conductor and composer. And I was trying to think of what to do for this string ensemble. And during the time I was sort of starting to develop this was right around when Hurricane Sandy hit in New York, like 2012 or 2011, whenever that was. Right. And this funny thing happened. The wind, I lived downtown, and the wind was making these really strange sounds out of our windows, like when the storm was building up, like crazy sounds, like not normal sounds of wind, like you picture in a movie or something like that. And it was sounding like choirs of voices, dissonant and consonant, and then like one thing and then another, just like all kinds of really weird stuff. It was like some strange phenomena was going on. I couldn't figure out what it was, And I sat inside my house for a couple hours listening to it while the storm was getting bigger and bigger. And I tried to do a recording, like crack open the window and record it, and it just wasn't working. And I was like, this is too weird sounding. I got to go out and try and record it. So I like put on my rain hood and stuff and wrapped my tape recorder in plastic wrap and went out and spent like 45 minutes out on the street. Like, you know, big pieces of wood were flying down the street. The wind was whipping up. And I was over by the West Side Highway, and the water was just starting to spill over onto the road. You know, it was obviously a disaster about to happen, but the sounds were nuts, like totally crazy. And so I recorded like over 45 minutes. I recorded some bits and pieces of sound, and came back to my house and put the headphones on and went over to the piano and just tried to figure out like what I was hearing, and like made some quick notes and like jotted down some notes. Like there were all these weird dissonant clusters is what I was really hearing. Yeah. And then a couple weeks later, it occurred to me that I could use these recordings as a basis for this piece, for this string orchestra, you know, and I could translate the sounds of the wind noises that I was hearing to the strings. So that's so the piece developed from this kind of conceptual basis. And, you know, at the time I thought like, wow, this is weird. I was thinking of Aeolian harps. The Greeks used to make these wind harps where they'd stretch these strings in windy places and put like a reflector around it, kind of like the body of an acoustic guitar would be a reflector. And the wind would activate the strings and they would tune them, and you'd get these wind chords and things like that. And when I first moved to New York, I was living in Tribeca, like 79, 80. Yeah. And what's now Battery Park was at that time a sandy beach. It was all just landfill, and it was kind of like a big sandy beach. And they had this yearly thing called Art on the Beach. Uh-huh. And these two sound artists called Bill and Mary Buchan made an Aeolian harp there one summer. And it was like a gigantic aluminum umbrella with strings strung across, like, you know, at the bottom of the umbrella. And it was really cool sounding. And here I was thinking during the storm, like, wow, the wind is playing Lower Manhattan like an Aeolian harp, like rushing through the fire escapes and these cement canyons and making all this weird stuff happen. Yeah. And so, like, all the time I was developing the piece, that's what I thought. I found out a couple years later, I stumbled across some weird article that said that something about the construction of the lower couple dozen floors of the World Trade Center, you know, it's got kind of this metal housing around it that's kind of like anti-terrorist or whatever. It hides like superstructures so you can't like crash a tank into it or whatever. Yeah. But there's something about the structure that sounds really crazy in the wind. Yeah. And I think that's what I was hearing this day somehow. I mean, maybe. I mean, I don't know, but it was like kind of dashed my vision of this thing happening with the wind in these cement canyons or whatever.
Nice.
But
anyway. There was something about the old World Trade Center.
But this is the new one. I'm talking about the new one.
This
is
the
the
one,
Hurricane Sandy one.
Oh, yeah,
it's
right.
like during that period. So
the Sandy time.
Yeah. So people have said they've heard these weird wind sounds since then. Whenever there's a high wind around the World Trade Center site. So maybe that's what I was hearing.
Yeah, that was. I do. I still remember. I saw the Bronca's 100 Guitars thing the summer before 9/11.
Yeah,
it was
probably
on tour, like a month and a half
just
before.
a couple of months before. My wife was there with our young kids at the time.
Yeah.
And
so some of the crazy things about that time. That's one of the things of like, can't believe I saw like 100 guitars like right between the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
And my other weird thing that day was that I was gonna go see. There was this. The story would be better if I remember their name, but there was like a conceptual German art group that was having an art show on 9/11, like about photographs they did where they had supposedly knocked a window out of the World Trade Center and built a balcony. Because remember, like on the 100th floor, they had like those free gallery spaces.
Yeah. I remember this story. I can't remember the artist either.
Supposedly took a window out really quickly and built a balcony, took a photograph, and then put the window back in. And they were having sort of a show about that on 9/11. I was like, I'm going to go see that. It's going to be crazy. And then, boom.
Then everything happened. Yeah. So how do you guys write your music? Is it collectively written, or does somebody kind of bring stuff in, or is it built on bed? If it's built on beds of loops, when you're playing live, are there like click tracks on stage and stuff like that?
No, the method we use is we call them the loop amp or the loop amps. So drummer John plays in the middle of the stage, and then so behind him are two giant Ampeg stacks, right? And so either Dave or I send a loop to the. We each have our own loop amp, sort of on our own setting, but so the loop just as audio is projected to the drummer. So
okay, so
the loop's
like he's
the
playing
click,
with an
right?
amp behind him. Yeah.
And so from wherever you stand on stage, you can also hear the loop. But I mean, if you lose the rhythm, you still have the drummer playing to it, right? So yeah, I mean, in a really simplified way, it's like loop plus complement, like melody or something like that. And then like melodies, and we also we were a 4-piece earlier in our history, so it was almost like traffic jam control. So it was like wow, because we never settled for this like rhythm guitar, lead guitar kind of thing, right? Which is sort of the traditional. So it was always just like, okay, you have a line, I have a line, you have a line. So it was the multiplicity of voices. So, but it was really about how do you just arrange it so everybody has room. So, an obvious way to do that is call response, like ba 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 ba.
Yep.
And so, it was like it's in the simplest way. I mean, that's what's going on. I think still to this day.
Do you guys employ? I haven't seen you guys play. I hate to say,
Yeah.
but do you employ a lot of visual stuff while you're playing? I mean, I do a lot of instrumental-based music, and I usually find I'm more comfortable on stage if there's like projections or something like that going, because there's no lead singer focal point to sort of
I think
draw the audience's attention.
Well, that's probably the exact reason that
that you don't.
We don't. Yeah, I suppose it's like, hey, I'm playing guitar here. Check it out.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the shows, when you see bands with the video backdrops, which is mostly what you're talking about, I guess.
Yep.
It's that that's what you stare at.
Yeah.
And I went to see a band.
Well,
and
sometimes it's just two guys looking at laptops, so there's not much else to stare at.
I know. What do you do then? I know that's a trick. That's a problem about the modern world. Yeah. But so that's why we don't employ visuals too much. Like on our previous album, Gloss Drop, there was the guest vocals as you mentioned, and so we did have LED screens for the singer.
Did
so
you ever
it was like
do
a guy
any shows
staring
with
at the camera going
live?
blah blah blah. We had we Altamo's parties.
Yeah, of
right?
course.
And we did that. We curated one of those, and we had Gary Newman play.
Really?
And then he was going to come on, but he actually last minute said, was like, I don't think I can hit that high note right now.
Really?
Yeah. And so, and then
I don't think I can hit that high note right now. Wow.
Yeah. Which is an honest thing.
Sure.
And then,
sure.
And Matias Aguayo, he's the guy who sang the song Ice Cream.
Yeah. That's a cool song.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks. Yeah. He did it a couple of times, and I thought one time it really clicked in Italy. A show in Italy we did, and I thought it was like that's the way it should be. And then a lot of the other times I think we did a show in Glastonbury with him, and like those, that's one of the biggest festivals in the world, and plus you add the UK factor where everyone was just like, get on, get off, like so it was
and the mud,
on the mud. So it was just like it was I think it was a technical disaster for some reason. Like we never rehearsed with a guy, and he gets on stage and it's like didn't work that well. I thought that time, but and Kazu did it once too.
Oh right, Kazu was the other vocalist.
Yeah, Route to Rock in France.
Oh, that's a cool festival.
I think she did Route to Rock, or maybe she did Tokyo, show in Tokyo with us. Yeah, but we did it with her before too, and that actually went well. So occasionally we did the guest vocals on stage. Maybe we should back up so the thing is I'm sort of an old guy and you're sort of an old guy.
Older guy.
Yeah, you're maybe a little older than I am. So, but I'm still younger than you in the sense that when I was 15, I was into punk rock and I knew I was into punk rock, and so it's like, which brought me to the SST catalog, and I was like, well, I was buying records. There's this band Sonic Youth, and the word youth was in it, so I was like, that's probably punk. I guess I'll get that. Yeah. And then and it was EVOL I got.
Yeah,
we
duped you. Although
I was
that,
like, well,
that
what?
record was just in. I just opened Rolling Stone today, and that record's in their top 40 punk records of all time. I
Oh,
was
well,
like,
they thought
I
it
was
was
like
punk, too.
leafing through it. I was like, well, we're not going to be in here. We weren't a punk band. And then I was like, oh,
right.
there's Evol.
You guys thought you were cooler than that. Well,
no,
when
not
Don-
cooler than that. We just didn't
Well,
think we
when
were cool
Don Cab,
enough.
my old band, started, we thought we were way better than punk rock. But then, in hindsight,
How could anything be way better than
I was
punk
like,
rock?
yeah. Well, this is early '90s when like it was sort of the cooler bands at that point sounded like Sonic Youth or something. But yeah, so anyway, this is 15-year-old me. So I was like, man, EVOL. It grew on me, and it took about a year, and then I was like, and then it really it changed the way I saw things, and so then I think I went backwards to Bad Moon Rising, and then Sister came out, and I was excited, I was ready for that, and so it really so thank you, because it definitely at a pivotal time in my life set me in a direction that I feel like I'm still on in some ways.
Yeah. Wow.
So
That's very cool.
So
like, who do you think of as, like, do you feel like you have peers locally on this, like, do Battles hang out with certain other bands or go to see,
yeah, who's our generation?
Yeah.
Who's our
or like if someone said, like, tell me, where you're getting your influences from, for the music you're making.
Right. Well, right.
And going
Well,
back to
generally,
Don
it's
Cab,
funny
like
'cause-
predominantly instrumental music, it's unusual right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, the Don Cab, I think because it's funny. I mean, Battles is a New York band. We're from New York. We started in New York.
Yeah.
Although I think a little bit, and John, our drummer, had been in Helmet, right? So that sort of has a geographical identifier.
Yeah.
Like, that's New York. But then I think, like, for me, like, my bands had been in Pittsburgh and Chicago before that, and there was a little bit more, and also maybe we're on Warp Records, which is out of London, and it has a little bit of an international kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, it's not a local identifier. So I feel like a lot of people don't even know we're from New York. Mm-hmm. And then you add to the fact that, I don't know, we started when I was, I think, this battle started when I was like 30 or something like that. So it was like, I don't know. I wasn't like the 22-year-old staying out every night till 5 in the morning partying. Like if I went to NYU or something. Like there was like a generation of those kids who went to NYU. It seemed like the guys from Interpol and Yeahs.
Yep.
And the Strokes, or I don't know. All those dudes were all like had their coming of age together in New York. Whereas like I sort of did that more in Chicago. I feel. And so I was already a little bit of an outsider to the process, and I live out in Brooklyn, and now I have a family and kids. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I don't know. I just got off. I go to Mexico, I play a show. I go to Europe, play a show. I go to Japan, play a show. I don't know. In a strange way, New York is, it's. I don't know, what is New York. What could we say about it?
Did you guys come of age in the same? Like, did you guys start around the same time as those bands, like Yeahs? Or a little bit behind them?
We were behind them. We were starting when they were blowing up. I mean, because, I don't know. My version of that history was that it sort of seemed like 9/11 happened and that Strokes record came out. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, New York City became a darling of media and world attention. And Brooklyn became thought of as a cool place.
Yeah.
But that was like right when we were starting, as in like nobody knows us.
Yeah.
And also, I was really interested in us taking our time and because John had been in Helmet and I had been in Don Cab, which was known enough that at least people were going to be like expecting something.
Right.
And I wanted us to sort of have a new voice and not just sound like a combination of our old bands.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted us to take our time and sort of kick around for a couple of years. And I figured, if we're worth hearing, people will find us eventually, right? Mm-hmm. So it took us a couple of years to make records and stuff. So we were definitely after that, I think in like the record, it seemed people started to pay attention to us was in 2007, Mirrored. So
hey, tell me about the cover of that record.
Mirrored.
Yeah, I really love the album cover.
Yeah, right. It was glass box.
Was that constructed for the album cover?
And
really?
Dave, our bass player, he and his his brothers are like both carpenters, and so Dave was like, we were talking about, it was like the Fripp Eno cover, like
yeah,
the mirrors,
no pussyfooting.
the mirrors chaining, for the infinite effect, and so it was like, let's do something with this, and it sort of coincided with Tim Cicenti. I think I'm saying his last name correctly. He's a photographer, and he had been playing around with he knew how to photograph through a mirrored box, like a one. What am I saying? Is it one-way?
One-way mirror?
One-way mirror. So where the shininess is just the inside and you can see into it from the outside.
Okay.
And if you light it really brightly from above and the outside is dark, from the outside you can see into the mirrored chain.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dave and his brothers actually built the box.
Wow, that's crazy.
And Tim knew, had the sort of director of photography know-how to sort of make it come alive on film. And so we made a music video and shot that cover.
Wow, the cover is really cool. It's really striking.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
I remember shooting it too. You know how those things, like we shot a music video and did the album session, and so it's like a long day inside this really brightly lit six-sided cube that it was really, my point being, it was really hot. It was like sweating.
Where do you guys play locally?
Do
Do you play much these days around New York?
Yeah, we played
I mean, like when
Webster
you guys were
Hall last fall.
okay, but when let me rephrase that. When you guys were first starting to play in New York, where were you playing? Like there were a couple
Yes,
places
of
that
course.
Sonic Youth, when we started,
Yeah.
we played at CB's and we played at this place on the Lower East Side called the Sin Club and stuff. And there were a couple places that were kind of very nurturing to us in our early days where we played a lot and, were able to work out our stuff.
Yeah, I think for us it was probably North 6th.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Right, which
Wow.
is now
That was a cool
Has
place.
been sort of turned into
Yeah.
Music Hall of Williamsburg.
Yeah.
And an early show at Galapagos, which was actually used to be right next door to North 6.
Yeah, I played there a couple times.
Early show at Irving Plaza, I think, opening for TV and the radio. Or no, was that? I don't know.
And if somebody asks you, like, what kind of music do you play?
Right. Yeah, I know that one. Right.
I mean, do you?
Well, I'm almost like I don't even want to say the word math rock because people have always that's such an applied term. And
are you counting on stage?
Yeah, I know, right. And I always thought that was like a stupid term, but the more I've denied it in my life, the more people go, obviously it's like the politician who has to come out and give a press conference who's like, I did nothing wrong with that woman.
Yeah,
then, of course, everybody says, obviously he did.
He's obviously a math rocker.
Like, no. So, and I've almost like,
I mean, I always just say rock.
Yeah, I know.
It seems like a catch-all for everything in a way.
That's the non-answer, though.
In a way, it is. In a way, it's
right?
the real answer and the non-answer because it's not genrefying it,
Yeah.
But I mean.
But don't we want to genreify everybody except for ourselves?
I guess so. I guess it's true. Yeah, put everybody in a pocket.
Like who's he? Oh, he does that thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Me, I'm not that simple. I'm very complex.
Yeah.
Or something. But actually, I think probably some people would comfortably accept the title.
Yeah.
But I think that my problem with the term math rock is a lot of times when I hear the music that's supposed to be math rock, I don't like it. And I'm like, oh, God, I hope I'm not like that. But I don't know. Were you guys noise rock?
We were called noise rock for
Is that what they called it
ages.
in the 80s?
Yeah, that's what they called it. And we always hated that term until it came to the point where we just kind of embraced it. And we're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
We'll be noise rock, you know? I mean, that whole... the whole term kind of started out of there used to be this famous club that was like, in the early 80s, clubs were kind of like discotheques still a little bit.
Were they?
And there was Danceteria, and there was...
and you would do shows at places like that?
Yeah, we would. Everybody would. Madonna'd play one night, and Sonic Youth and Swans would play the next night. And there was another one called Hurrahs, which was like a sort of a glitzy, fancy club up in Midtown. And like, they'd have everybody. I saw the first Perubu tour in New York there, and stuff like that. They'd have Devo or B-52s, and then people would go dance and snort cocaine afterwards or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, different crowd is what I mean. But the owner of Haraz was asked why they didn't book more downtown bands, and he said, "Well, there's not very much going on down there. Most of it's just noise." And this is like
So you think
1981.
that's where it came from?
Well, so Thurston grabbed that line was on the cover of the Soho Weekly News, which was a local paper at the time, and Thurston grabbed that line and said, like, I'm going to hold a festival, a week-long festival for all the downtown bands, and we're going to call it the Noise Fest. Kind of like giving the finger to this guy uptown that wasn't hiring any of the bands, and it became this. It was like the summer of 1981, and it became this real touchstone where like all the downtown bands played, and all the people that were like in the no wave bands, like Lydia played, and the people from Mars, and Ardo played, the DNA probably played, and Glenn Branca and Reese Chatham, it like brought all these weird. It was kind of like everybody who was doing that stuff who maybe didn't know the other people that were doing it for, I think it was 10 days long, and it was held in the White Columns Gallery, which is now right near here, but at that time was on the western edge of Spring Street. And so for 10 nights that hot summer, everybody was just hanging out at this gallery listening to different bands play.
Yeah.
And it really kind of solidified this scene. And at a certain point after that, it was like, yeah, we called it the Noise Festival, and, sure, we'll be a noise band. I mean, it became a lazy thing for, critics can be lazy. So it became a lazy way to refer to Sonic Youth in those days. Like, oh, they're a noise band from New York. And it was like, we just, we'd get angry if we thought like they were using it in a lazy way and not really getting what it was. But at a certain point, we were like, what the hell? Sure, we're playing noise,
Right. Yeah, and for me with math, it's if you say like mathematics is the recognition of patterns, like seeing a like in some big picture, then I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember I know somebody. Yeah, I did that thing. I did this like kind of really experimental electronic piece for a fundraiser for the American Composers Orchestra once.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I got introduced as math rock guy, and I was like, even here I'm like math rock. Like I can like compose like polka music like later in my life, it would still be like math rock. Like for you too. I mean, you probably do a solo acoustic show, and it'd be like noise rock.
Yeah.
The noise guy.
That's been my recent direction. I've been doing a lot more acoustic music at the moment, which is
acoustic noise.
Very strange. Yeah, acoustic noise. Yeah, I guess so.
Well, going back to days that are earlier than ones I remember, you hear things, New York gentrifying and old performance spaces closing, and things getting pushed further and further out, that kind of story. Like, do you think, is your sense that there are just as many viable, vibrant places to play and perform and do sort of outsider music as there were then, or less? If you go out to Queens and Brooklyn and these sort of DIY warehouse spaces,
yeah. No,
is it about
I think
the same, or?
I think it's similar. I mean, there was a time when all that stuff was in Manhattan, and like the music community kind of was based in Manhattan, in Lower Manhattan, and you had Max's and CB's, but you also had smaller places.
And that kind of creates a focus.
You had the Cooler, which was right down the street from here, which was a super relevant place that closed around the same time that Tonic opened, and Tonic kind of took over that crowd in terms of it being a low-key place where you could, I played tons of shows at the Cooler, which was on 14th Street here.
Did
and
Sonic
Tonic
Youth have something to do with the Cooler?
Well, only that we played there
Just
a
that you
lot
played
in different capacities, like a lot of us individually or in different, not as Sonic Youth. I mean, I think Sonic Youth probably played there once or twice, but me and Thurston and Kim and Steve each played there dozens of times in other improv-y kind of things. And then later that got transplanted to Tonic and later, to North 6. And like these days, I'm playing shows at Transpecos out in Ridgewood or,
I've heard of it,
a place like that. It's cool. It's a little low-key place, or Union Pool or, places like that.
Yeah.
I think there's still as many places to play. When you're kind of a newish band, you're not looking for the big glitzy place where all the press is going to come and write about you, because nobody knows who you are, and you're just looking for a place where you can play frequently, and kind of hone your thing. And
hopefully your friends come.
And so I think there's still a ton of those places out there. They're not in Manhattan anymore, and neither is the music community for the most part. But Baby's All Right and St. Vitus and like lots of places. Secret Project Robot and. And I've done stuff in a lot of those places, and you got to value those places for what they are. They're not the places where you're going to get media coverage or anything like that, but you're just going to have a place to play. And
I sort of wonder, maybe it's not worth trying to sort of figure out the Williamsburg moment, but I think that there were like late '90s, early 2000s there was this moment where there was enough of a critical mass of young hipsters, or whatever you want to call it, living right around that Bedford area, but it was still affordable. And that you kind of got that same moment that I imagine maybe like the lower Manhattan was. In the early punk days and stuff.
Yeah, and you had North 6 and Galapagos and some other spaces
everyone
over
being
there.
around.
Yeah.
As opposed to...
Well, that's the important thing. I mean, look, in the early days, all the music community was kind of where you lived. So you'd meet people all the time on the streets and stuff like that. And at this point, I still live in Lower Manhattan, and the music community is far away from where I live. It's like this. You were mentioning Yayas and Strokes and all that, and I remember around that period, like around the turn of the century, I guess, we'd be in England, and people would Sonic Youth would be on tour, and people would be asking us like, "What do you think of the Strokes?" And we'd be like, "Who are the Strokes?" And they were like, "They're the latest New York City band." Like, what do you mean you don't know who they are? Like literally for like a year, people were asking us what we thought of the Strokes, and we had no idea who they were, because they were, it was taking place in a whole other part of New York than the New York, and we weren't at that point that closely tied to the sort of like that level of the music community. We were out on tour or whatever it was, but. It's funny how different scenes can kind of be happening in the place where you live, and sometimes you're tapped into them, and sometimes you're not.
Yeah, right. New York now obviously has so many multiple focuses, and people don't know each other.
Yeah.
But let me see. What else would I like to talk to you about?
So when you write music, are you writing with a computer in front of you?
I'm kind of going back and forth. A guy in Italy just made me a guitar. It's called Hope Custom Labs. He just made me a guitar. It's sort of like a single coil, Fender-esque guitar. Something actually I would picture on you more than me, because I've always played Gibsons, Les Pauls, and SGs. So it's really cool. I'm almost discovering like a new aspect. I'm like, wow, the single coil. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
and so I've just been sitting on my couch playing guitar, which is so novel now, because like I'm sort of so weighed under by effects and gadgets, and I'm it's sort of like beautiful again, because that's how I used to play guitar. And
that's what I've kind of come back to in the last few years, is like sitting on the couch with acoustic guitars and just like coming up with stuff and like getting tied back to this very elemental thing that kind of where I started with the instrument in a way, and just finding new things in it still is pretty great.
Right, and making things strange.
Yeah.
Like again, rediscovering like the novel. Like I've always sort of mostly played standard tuning. Probably because you guys, like, to me, the Sonic Youth sound so owned like the droney alternative weird tunings.
Yeah,
I guess. Like I kind of had to like escape to my own territory and like sort of like try to apply something within a traditional tuning. And but I understand how like the alternative tuning thing would sort of make it strange. Like like new tuning, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I can't.
You got to invent the chords and all that kind of stuff.
That's good stuff.
Hi, I'm Elliot Einhorn, and you've been listening to the Talkhouse Music Podcast. Subscribe on iTunes to receive all of our new Talkhouse Music and Talkhouse Film podcast episodes. Thanks to Samsung 837 for hosting this series of live conversations, to Giant Step for coordination, and to Ian Williams and Lee Ranaldo for such a wonderful talk. Visit thetalkhouse.com to read intelligent and notable musicians and filmmakers writing about the latest in music and film.